On a dark stretch of road, a brutal collision between a motorcycle and a truck leaves a man bleeding out on the asphalt. Sarika, a young woman walking home from her office, drops to her knees. Relying on her previous nursing training, she immediately presses her bare hands against his shattered chest, fighting desperately to keep him alive. She knows exactly how to apply pressure to a severe trauma wound, but the surrounding traffic is at a dead halt. The ambulance is trapped miles away. Despite her continuous, frantic efforts, the stranger's breathing slows, and he dies directly in her arms, leaving her covered in his blood. Returning home, the psychological weight of the evening crushes her. Sarika sits awake through the night, unable to blink without seeing the man's final moments. A single agonizing thought loops in her mind. If the ambulance had arrived 3 minutes earlier, he would have survived. To anyone observing her, Sarika is a deeply compassionate bystander. She is a woman whose empathy forced her to step into a horrific situation and who is now carrying the heavy, entirely undeserved burden of a random tragedy. But the next morning, that psychological trauma manifests as severe physical decay. Sarika wakes with a blinding migraine. Her limbs feel like lead weights, anchoring her to the bed. Alarmed by her sudden deterioration, her mother attempts a traditional ritual to ward off the evil eye by burning dried red chilies. When the chilies hit the open flame, they incinerate completely, yet they produce absolutely zero smoke, an unnatural anomaly signaling something far worse than bad luck. The environment inside the house rapidly degrades. The ambient temperature in Sarika's bedroom plummets. When she finally pulls herself up to look in her bedroom mirror, a tall, shadowy silhouette stands directly behind her, watching her every move. This parasitic entity followed Sarika home from the crash site, successfully transitioning from a residual haunting to an active, predatory occupation of her own body. The haunting quickly shifts from visual terror to physical violence. Sarika begins hearing a low, continuous whisper, promising never to leave her side. Moments later, the heavy metal ceiling fan in her room inexplicably rips free from its mounting and crashes to the floor, inches away from her. The aggression soon targets her fiancé, Rohan. When he visits the house, Sarika calmly walks up to him and pours a cup of scalding hot tea directly onto his chest. When he recoils in pain, she watches him with a blank expression, speaking in a cold, detached voice that doesn't sound like her own. Retreating to her bedroom, the entity fully seizes control of her motor functions. Standing before the mirror, Sarika's muscles lock up. Her neck abruptly snaps sideways to a sickening, impossible angle, while her face stretches into a dead, unnatural smile. When Rohan enters the room, the contorted Sarika lunges at his throat with terrifying strength. He pushes her back in sheer panic, causing her to hit her head and black out. Hours later in the hospital, Rohan visits her bedside. She grabs his wrist, opens eyes entirely devoid of pupils, and calmly informs him that the revenge has just begun. The ghost is done throwing objects and dropping temperatures. It has successfully breached Sarika's physical form, weaponizing her own hands and voice to actively terrorize the people closest to her. Desperate, Sarika's family turns to religious intervention. Her brother secures a consecrated holy thread from the local temple to tie around her wrist. But somewhere between the temple steps and his front door, the thread inexplicably vanishes from his securely zipped pocket. The entity's countermeasures are brutal and highly intelligent. The morning the temple priest is scheduled to visit their home to perform a purification ritual, he suffers sudden, total paralysis. With no prior medical history, the holy man is entirely incapacitated before he can even cross their threshold. Left completely defenseless, the family accelerates the wedding plans, hoping a change of environment will save her. But behind locked doors, Sarika quietly cuts up the blood-soaked shirt she wore on the night of the accident. She carefully sews the stiff, stained fabric scraps directly into the heavy embroidery of her red bridal lehenga. Eerie, methodical. As the wedding ceremony begins, the family believes they are securing her future. But as Sarika circles the sacred fire, a freezing, invisible presence walks in lockstep beside her, quietly accepting the marital vows. By weaving the victim's blood into the bridal lehenga, Sarika provided the spirit with a permanent anchor, effectively locking out any chance of future spiritual interference. The tension reaches its breaking point inside the bridal suite. Sarika enters holding a warm glass of milk for Rohan. She stands over him, offering the glass with a predatory, unblinking stare that immediately puts him on edge. Before he can take a sip, heavy knocking rattles the door. Rohan's mother frantically warns him not to drink the milk. She found a dead lizard at the bottom of the boiling pot in the kitchen. A silent, lethal poisoning attempt is narrowly averted by sheer luck. Rohan turns the lights off, terrified of the woman sleeping beside him. An hour later, a rhythmic tapping echoes through the pitch-black room. He calls her name into the void. Without warning, Sarika lunges from the darkness, her hands locking around his throat like a steel vice. Pinning him to the floor, she finally reveals the source of her unnatural rage. She tells Rohan that his memory is poor. She reminds him of February 25th, of a broken street lamp, and of severed brake lines. The voice tearing out of Sarika's throat belongs to Naman, the man from the motorcycle crash. Naman's presence here is a targeted, premeditated invasion. He has spent the last 2 weeks methodically clearing a path to reach Rohan in this exact room. Rohan ordered Naman's death as a clinical corporate execution, timed perfectly to ensure the immediate transfer of high-value business shares. This timeline maps the hit. On the left, Rohan secures the truck. On the right, Sarika coordinates her arrival to play the bystander. At the moment of impact, Naman recognized the betrayal. His dying consciousness bypassed the ether and latched directly onto the nearest conspirator. Inside the bedroom, Naman's spirit executes his judgment. Controlling Sarika's body, he lifts Rohan from the floor, repeatedly smashes his skull against the bedroom wall until he stops moving, and throws his limp body out the window into the darkness below. With the primary target eliminated, the ghost turns its attention to the host. He forces Sarika to pick up a heavy knife, drive it deep into her own throat, and throw herself from the exact same window, erasing both murderers in a single night. The perfect murder requires absolute distance. By placing herself squarely in the victim's blood to maintain their cover story, Sarika gave a dying man the physical leverage he needed. Naman ignored the police, bypassed the courts, and weaponized the killer's own bodies to carry out his sentence.